Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholes. Today's story comes to us from the Italian collection of folk tales, the Pentamerone. This is The Three Sisters. It is a great truth that from the same wood are formed the statues of idols and the rafters of gallows, kings' thrones and cobblers' stalls. And another strange thing is that from the same rags are made the paper on which the wisdom of sages is recorded, and the crown which is placed on the head of a fool. The same, too, may be said of children. One daughter is good, and another bad. One idle, another a good housewife. One fair, another ugly, one spiteful, another kind, one unfortunate, another born to luck, and who, being all of one family, ought to be of one nature. But leaving this subject to those who know more about it, I will merely give you an example in the story of the three daughters of the same mother, wherein you will see the difference of manners which brought the wicked daughters into the ditch, and the good daughter to the top of the wheel of fortune. There was at one time a woman who had 3 daughters, 2 of whom were so unlucky that nothing ever succeeded with them. All their projects went wrong, all their hopes were turned to chaff. But the youngest, who was named Nella, was born to good luck, and I verily believe that at her birth all things conspired to bestow on her the best and choicest gifts in their power. The sky gave her the perfection of its light, Venus, matchless beauty of form, love, the first dart of his power, nature, the flower of manners. She never set about any work that did not go off to a nicety. She never took anything in hand that it did not succeed to a hair. She never stood up to dance that she did not sit down with applause. On which account she was envied by her jealous sisters, and yet not so much as she was loved and wished well by all others. As greatly as her sisters desired to put her underground, so much more did other folks carry her on the palm of their hands. Now there was in that country an enchanted prince who was so attracted by her beauty that he secretly married her. And in order that they might enjoy one another's company without exciting the suspicion of the mother, who was a wicked woman, the prince made a crystal passage which led from the royal palace directly into Nella's apartment, although it was 8 miles distant. Then he gave her a certain powder, saying, "Every time you wish to see me, throw a little of this powder into the fire, and instantly I will come through this passage as quick as a bird running along the crystal road to gaze upon this face of silver." Having arranged it thus, not a night passed that the prince did not go in and out, backwards and forwards, along the crystal passage, until at last the sisters, who were spying the actions of Nella, found out the secret, and laid a plan to put a stop to the sport. And in order to cut the thread at once, they went and broke the passage here and there, so that when the unhappy girl threw the powder into the fire to give the signal to her husband the prince, who used to always come to running in furious haste, would hurt himself in such a manner against the broken crystal that it was truly a pitiable sight to see. And being unable to pass further on, he turned back, all cut and slashed like a Dutchman's breeches. Then he sent for all the doctors in town, but as the crystal was enchanted, the wounds were mortal, and no human remedy availed. When the king saw this, despairing of his son's condition, he sent out a proclamation that whoever could cure the wounds of the prince, if a woman, she would have him for a husband; if a man, he should have half his kingdom. Now when Nella, who was pining away from the loss of the prince, heard this, she dyed her face, disguised herself, and unknown to her sisters she left home to go to see him before his death. But as by this time the sun's gilded ball with which he plays in the fields of heaven was running towards the west, night overtook her in a wood close to the house of an ogre, where, in order to get out of the way of danger, she climbed up into a tree. Meanwhile, the ogre and his wife were sitting at table, with the windows open, in order to enjoy the fresh air while they ate. As soon as they had emptied their cups and put out the lamps, they began to chat of one thing and another, so that Nella, who was as near to them as the mouth to the nose, heard every word they spoke. Among the things the ogress said to her husband, "My pretty hairy hide, tell me, what news? What do they say abroad in the world?" And he answered, "Trust me, there is no hand's breadth clean. Everything's going topsy-turvy and awry." "But what is it?" replied the wife. "Why, I could tell pretty stories of all the confusion that is going on," replied the ogre. "For one hears things that are enough to drive one mad, such as buffoons rewarded with gifts, rogues esteemed, cowards honored, robbers protected, and honest men little thought of. But as these things only vex one, I will merely tell you what has befallen the king's son. He had made a crystal path along which he used to go to visit a pretty lass, but by some means or other, I know not how, all the road has been broken, and, as he was going along the passage as usual, he wounded himself in such a manner that before he can stop the leak the whole conduit of his life will run out. The king has indeed issued a proclamation with such great promises to whoever cures his son, but it is all labor lost, and the best he can do is quickly and get ready mourning, and prepare the funeral." When Bella heard the cause of the prince's illness, she sobbed and wept bitterly, and said to herself, "Who is the wicked soul who has broken the passage and caused so much sorrow?" But, as the ogress now went on speaking, Nella was as silent as a mouse, and listened. "And is it possible," said the ogress, "that this world is lost to this poor prince, and that no remedy can be found for his malady?" "Hark ye, granny," replied the ogre. "The doctors are not called upon to find remedies that may pass the bounds of nature. This is not a fever that will yield to medicine and diet, much less are these ordinary wounds which require lint and oil, for the charm that was on the broken glass produces the same effect as onion juice does on the iron heads of arrows, which makes the wound incurable. There is only one thing that could save his life, but don't ask me to tell it to you, for it is a thing of importance." "Do tell me, dear old Long-Tusk," cried the ogress. "Tell me, if you would not see me die." "Well then," said the ogre, "I will tell you, provided you promise me not to confide it to any living soul, for it would be the ruin of our house and the destruction of our lives." "Fear nothing, my dear sweet little husband," replied the ogress, "for you shall soon see pigs with horns, apes with tails, moles with eyes, and a single word shall pass my lips." And so saying, she put one hand upon the other and swore to it. "You must know, then," said the ogre, "that there is nothing under the sky nor above the ground that can save the prince from the snares of death but our fat. If his wounds are anointed with this, his soul will be arrested, which is just at the point of leaving the dwelling of his body." Nella, who overheard all that passed, gave time to let them finish their chat, and then, getting down from the tree and taking heart, she knocked at the ogre's door, crying, "Ha, my good masters, I pray you for charity, alms, some sign of compassion. Have a little pity on a poor, miserable, wretched creature who is banished by fate far from her own country and deprived of all human aid, who has been overtaken by night in this wood and is dying of cold and hunger." And, crying thus, she went on knocking and knocking at the door. Upon hearing this deafening noise, the ogress was going to throw her half a loaf and send her away, but the ogre, who is more greedy of flesh than the squirrel is of nuts, the bear of honey, the cat of fish, the sheep of salt, or the ass of bran, said to his wife, "Let the poor creature in, for if she sleeps in the fields, who knows but she may be eaten up by some wolf?" In short, he talked so much that his wife at length opened the door for Nella, whilst, with all his pretended charity, he was all the time reckoning on making 4 mouthfuls of her. But the glutton counts one way and the host another, for the ogre and his wife drank till they were fairly tipsy. When they lay down to sleep, Nella took a knife from the cupboard and made a hash of them in a trice. Then she put all the fat into a vial, went straight to the court, where, presenting herself before the king, she offered to cure the prince. At this the king was overjoyed, and led her to the chamber of his son, and no sooner had she anointed him well with the fat than the wound closed in a moment, just as if she had thrown water on the fire, and he became sound as a fish. When the king saw this, he said to his son, "This good woman deserves the reward promised by the proclamation, and that you should marry her." But the prince replied, "It is hopeless, for I have no storeroom full of hearts in my body to share among so many. My heart is already disposed of, and another woman is already the mistress of it." Nella, hearing this, replied, "You should no longer think of her, who has been the cause of all your misfortune." "My misfortune has been brought on me by her sisters," replied the prince, "and they shall repent it." "Then you really love her?" said Nella. And the prince replied, "More than my own life." "Embrace me then," said Nella, "for I am the fire of your heart." But the prince, seeing the dark hue of her face, answered, "I would sooner take you for the coal than the fire, so keep off, don't blacken me." Whereupon Nella, perceiving that he did not know her, called for a basin of clean water and washed her face. As soon as the cloud of soot was removed and the sun shone forth, and the prince, recognizing her, pressed her to his heart and acknowledged her for his wife. Then he had her sisters thrown into an oven, thus proving truth of the old saying, "No evil ever went without punishment." And that is the story of the three sisters from the Pentamerone. This is Dan Scholes for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, anywhere that you like to get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio and TuneIn Radio. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every weekday morning. Thanks for listening.